Mm. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm enjoying just seeing your names again and reading some of your comments. Mary McCann, thanks for the reminder to honor this earth, and also to the indigenous people, the Dakota people of this land who have stewarded this earth for here in Minnesota for so long, the land. Jenny and Chuck, Amy and Jason, Carolyn and Young. Hi, Jessica. Does it sound okay for everybody tonight? Well, somebody say yay or nay. Awesome. Okay. So we will um, have about a 30-minute meditation period like we always do. And then you'll hear my voice at the end of that, and we'll have a conversation. All right. Hmm. So find yourselves into a comfortable enough seated position. Inviting the energy to settle in the body. Feeling the weight of the body, the heaviness, and the earth that can hold it. Perhaps you can notice that in the pressure points of the sits bones. And noticing the torso, perhaps with a little movement as the energy of the body swirls and the breath does its thing. And checking the posture for that nice balance, a felt sense of uprightness and dignity. Yes, dignity. All of us nobly born ones. And also some ease in the body, upright, dignified, and also relaxed. Spine erect, the belly soft. The neck doing its job, its structural work. And the head resting, being held up by the posterior chain, the torso, the neck. And tuning into the face, inviting ease here also, scanning down from the forehead, inviting the muscles to relax, the eyeballs to rest, the eyelids to be gentle. The jaw to rest, noticing the arms hanging from the shoulders, the hands resting wherever they are. And then, whenever you're ready, see if you can notice the breath in the body. It doesn't have to be any specific location, it can just be a feeling, an embodied knowing of the breath. We're not trying to change the breath. We're not trying to make it behave or do anything. We're just caring enough about our life to lovingly place our attention here. In breath can remind us of our vitality, our life force energy. And with the out breath, we're reminded not to hold on. Just letting go. And as we're practicing with the breath like this, we can also notice how it feels in the heart and the mind to be intimate. Does it feel like to be connected? No matter what is happening in your experience, seeing if you can tap into some appreciation of your efforts to be intimate, to train and connecting with care and wisdom. Dropping any need to get it right or do a good job. Just sitting here, noticing our life force energy, letting that go, and picking it up again. How sweet that we care about living life of intimacy and connection and clarity, so that we want to do this. Simple and beautiful. And feel welcome to pick up this little reflection anytime you need it. I care about this life. I care about living with clarity and intimacy. And so right now, I look for the breath. You can open your eyes now whenever you're ready. Feel free to stretch your body a little if you'd like to. And say hello to each other in the chat if you haven't. So this is the second talk on the topics that Tanisra presented in chapter 2 of Listening to the Heart. This book here. And I mention this each week, but if you're new tuning in, don't feel like you have to read it. But if you'd like to read it, it's a wonderful book, and I'll be using it to teach from for the next long time. Many weeks, maybe up to a year. We'll see how we're just going to work I'm just going to work my way through. We're going to work our way through together the chapters. Yeah, and so I've been really inspired by Tanisra's creative spirit and how she talks about practice in chapter 2, and her use of stories to illustrate her own journey with practice, and learning not to get rigid, but really emphasizing that the responsibility is ours to find our way, that the teachings are pointers to our responsibility, really, to show up, to learn, to practice, and to follow our nose, to go here and there, to use different strategies, to not get rigid with the strategies that we're using, to practice techniques, if you will, but to really like, oh yeah, I care about my life. I want to wake up. I want to be intimate. I want to be here. And we can do this in any moment. Just connect with our aspirations. Like, why do we do this? Why do we take to the cushion? Why do we come on and listen to a Dharma talk? Why do we do any reading? What makes us want to use our good heart, our wise and uh, our heart of clarity and compassion and in the world? What causes that movement? What causes that movement? So instead of just teaching directly using Tanisra's story so much or teaching her journey, it's really this chapter has really inspired me to do my own creative exploration over the past couple of weeks. And so I'm just going to share with you a little bit about where this has taken me tonight. And I'll start by reading this lovely quote in the beginning of chapter 2. Chapter 2 is called A Stab to the Heart. Ajahn Chah is Tanisra's teacher, Tanisra and Kittisaro, their teacher. They practiced as monks at the time, and Ajahn Chah, teacher. Dharma is in your heart, not in the forest. Don't believe others, just listen to your heart. You don't have to look anywhere else. Wisdom is in you, just like the sweet ripe mango is already in a young green one. With even a little intuitive wisdom, you will be able to see clearly the ways of the world. You will come to understand that everything in the world is your teacher. Yeah. Everything in the world is our teacher. I love that part that even with a little intuitive wisdom, it doesn't say, Ajahn Chah didn't say, if you follow the breath precisely or if you use this practice technique. No, he said, even with a little intuitive wisdom. So, really pointing us right from the beginning here, the importance of trusting ourselves. So, maybe this is a question for us: when can we hear our own intuitive wisdom? And when I've asked myself this question, what I've come to is just not a big elaborate essay on when I can trust my intuitive wisdom, but a very simple mantra, really. It actually reminds me of something another one of my teachers, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, has said: the relaxed mind can meditate. So when the heart is relaxed and content, this is when it becomes easiest for us to see or feel into our own intuitive wisdom. And if you've ever been to therapy, perhaps, or even had a intentional conversation with a dear friend where you felt really listened to, you know this is true. It's hard to hear ourselves when there's agitation in the system. The mind is thinking, 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 but when there's a lot of trust with another, there is this something slow and steady about the heart that can relax that happens with time. We can see this happen in the intimacy of the therapeutic relationship, but also in the closeness of friendships. And this feeling of trust that can be there, trusting our intuitive system, believing that not believe is not the right word, trusting this intuitiveness of wisdom and compassion that resides right here in the heart, that can be heard when we can actually relax and be with our life as it is. Our nervous systems actually start to relax and rest, and we open to a deeper vulnerability. And when we can do that, a deep sincerity. So, how do we recreate that trust right here in ourselves? And what feels important to point to is that which we can feel right here in ourselves can also be experienced in the relational field. So, I use therapy as an example, or a conversation with a good friend as an example. A therapeutic relationship is really poignant to me. Um, for one reason, because many of us have experienced that. And even if we haven't, we can use the intimacy of a good friend, a good friendship, to illustrate the same point. But the therapeutic relationship can be so intimate, right? We go in to, have a session with a therapist, for example, and we really dig into some deep territory. So just like a good therapist gives us their undivided attention, creatively attending to our words and our bodies, noticing the slightest change in our body language as we're expressing this or that, we can recreate those attentive conditions right here with our systems individually when we're practicing. And this kind of intimacy, easy intimacy and trust, vulnerability isn't available to us in every moment, and that's okay. But for it to be, it requires our persistent and loving effort. And I don't know if you know this experience, you probably do, but it can actually feel good to be intimate with the truth of our lives, the truth of our collective experience, the truth of this heart that cares and is broken. For example, you know, even when we're touching something very difficult, a difficult mind state, a difficult emotion that's there, a difficult reality that's hard to accept, heart pain. And why it feels so good is because we get that felt sense of intimacy right there. Like, oh, this is difficult, but it actually, if we tune in, it has a pleasant Vedana. It feels pleasant to connect. It actually feels pleasant to be aware. So this uh, capacity of the heart to be courageous isn't dependent on, because pleasantness is there right in the awareness itself. So, mindful awareness, that felt sense of intimacy, embodied intimacy, feels good no matter what the heart is noticing, no matter what the heart is connecting with, no matter what what's in front of us. That good feeling can be there even when the object or the experience is pleasant or unpleasant, which is really quite amazing. It gives us a lot of capacity. Our practice, our training to be with and in our lives gives us a lot of capacity, right? We don't have to, uh, we don't have to only, only pursue those experiences that are going to be exciting or invigorating. This is the trap we get into sometimes as human beings, often as human beings, the trap of craving new experiences. And so, one antidote is to learn how to tune into that pleasant Vedana that's there, just with awareness itself, right? And then we learn, like, oh, yeah, look, perhaps the heart doesn't need to do that, doesn't need to pursue and then gratify this experience, doesn't need to pursue that extra piece of chocolate. Or even if the heart is in pursuit of that chocolate, maybe perhaps it doesn't need to partake. So in chapter 2, Tanisara gives us this full permission to experiment with practices that lead to a capacity to be intimate. And this is actually, this capacity to be intimate is just a nice way of saying meditate or be mindful. So, this capacity to meditate, this capacity to be mindful, we can also say this capacity to be intimate with our lives. And I really appreciate this about how she has written this chapter. And a balanced mind is so important, can also seem somewhat out of reach at times. This mind, you've probably seen this, I have seen this, and in some ways that's why I'm teaching about this tonight, is because I'm watching my mind all the time go in and out of balanced places. It's just like in these difficult states and a lot of aversion, different aversive states, and then in these really peaceful places, and able to really kind of appreciate the flow of life around me with the springtime and all the scents and the flowers blooming. I noticed that this tree outside my window that you can't see right now is just in like 24 hours, it's so vibrant now. It's like pink and purple. The colors are so beautiful. And so watching this flow of life, even while navigating these really difficult and painful moments. So we're learning to watch the attitude of mind and be responsible for taking care of it. A relaxed mind can meditate, a balanced mind can meditate. And so always seems like all that we're doing these days, and a lot of the time, is trying to return to some balanced place so that we can keep going, keep living, right? Keep finding intimacy, keep finding that capacity to be clear and kind, be intimate right here, the clear and kind mind. All right here, even in this aversive place with the clear and kind mind, right? Meeting that too with kindness and clarity. So love, a balanced mind can meditate. What do we mean by meditate? We mean approaching each moment of our lives with care and clarity. So care might just simply be this a friendliness, a friendly attitude. And clarity might simply mean seeing deeply into the expressions of our lives, understanding, being willing to connect with the truth. So the truth of the seeds and the undercurrents of greed and the undercurrents of aversion, anger, ill will, and the undercurrents of delusion or ignorance. And we can notice these here in our lot, here in our hearts, and we can notice their expressiveness in our complex social world, in our systems, even. I've mentioned this in the past and in the previous weeks. And with the amount of uncertainty that we're taking in through our senses and through our bodies, really through our bodies, every time information comes in through our senses, it really lands right here in our bodies. And we're taking in so much these days through the media and through our experience in our homes and the little moving about that we're doing in the world. All of that lands right here in the body. And so, we might ask this question, what could be more important than finding some way to connect with a sense of balance? Yeah, even with the roller coaster that we're on, right? There can still be that intention or that aspiration to find balance as the mind flows. Like we don't have to stop its flight. We don't have to stop its movement into difficult terrain, into really peaceful terrain. We don't have to try to demand anything. Just be on the lookout for like what supports balance and what uh, leads us back to some place of contentedness, even as things are flowing. And we get to take full responsibility for our own balance. And again, this is more evident now than ever to me. Thinking of all the coping strategies that we normally have access to, and not even, you know, big, exciting coping strategies, but the small ones like face to face conversations or hugs or gatherings where there's some laughter. These are all balancing forces in our lives when we start to get out of balance into territory of a lot of wanting or territory of not wanting. And with all of these options, with all of the uh, typical options, with all of the comforts that we have, like being able to see friends, and uh, we can get a little lazy, honestly, and put the responsibility in our laziness. Sometimes the responsibility is placed on the outside forces, like then really on our own capacity, our own investment in this heart's developing this heart's capacity to be here, right? To accept the flow of life that's here and to be with it. Like I was just thinking, like, sometimes I would have a hard day at work and I would go, well, that's okay. I'll just call a friend on my way home and um, maybe we'll have a funny conversation, or I'll just drop by and see a friend on my way home. So, instead, and those are good things to do, those are really useful things to do. But right now, we don't have access to so much to those options. And so we have to, really be creative in our exploration of how to find some balance, both internally and in the limited movement of our lives. I'm going to take a 6-second pause and I'm going to turn on the light because it's getting a bit dark here. A little better. I'm going to test this mind's concentration right now to see if I can pick up where I left off. Thanks for your patience. Yeah, but even it's an interesting time to be a teacher. I think I've said this before, but just living into a new flow of sharing the Dhamma, being willing to accept small interruptions like that and get distracted as I'm reading the chat and wanting to help people resolve issues, and really staying connected to this heart that has something to say and wants to share that in case it's useful to you. So we're all in this terrain of figuring things out. And so can watch in any moment, no matter what's going on, if I'm just teaching the Dhamma or living my life, doing the dishes, walking my dog, whatever you're doing, eating, working, taking care of children, Zooming with friends. We can always be on the lookout for this heart that is in balance or out of balance, and accepting that that's just the terrain of the heart, and then giving it what it needs, seeing if we can appreciate, care, and offer some interest that might help it rebalance. And this is from Tanisara at the beginning of chapter 2. Dharma teachings and the forms used for their transmission serve us best when we remember that they are signposts. The teachings, various schools, and their methods are not an end in themselves, but reminders that point directly to the heart. They are there to support awakening, not to bind us up. And at the end of the day, while various practices and teachers can really help, we must be our own guide. Before his death, the Buddha said, "Be a lamp unto yourself, be a refuge to yourself. Those who take themselves those who take themselves no external refuge, but hold fast to the truth as their lamp and refuge, it is they who shall reach the highest goal." Teachings are not ultimate truths, they just point the way. It's just like food. There are many different kinds of food, some we prefer and some we can't digest. The point of eating is to be nourished, so we need to find what nourishes us the best, what encourages and what brings about insight and realization, different word. Methods should be supportive and empowering, flexible rather than too rigid. Saying this is the only way it can be done is too rigid. Sometimes teachings contradict each other. That doesn't mean to say that one is wrong and the other is right. They are appropriate to time and place. Their deeper purpose is to bring us into balance. Yes. My friend Kendrick Ronsky sent me a text. She's really sweet about sending me a text that I might use from time to time in my teaching. And one of the things she sent me just recently was an invitation to do howling practice. I don't know if I mentioned this a week ago or so, but I was like, oh yeah, just the creative. Sometimes whether it be howling practice or singing or dancing or kind of moving the body in rigorous ways or wild ways, sometimes it can be good medicine. It can really help balance the energy, take care of the mind, take care of the heart. Taking full responsibility for our awakening, using the teachings as signposts, but really following our nose. And actually, we need this flexibility of mind to take in the whole spectrum of experiences that we engage with in our humanness. And it's hard right now because it is hard right now. And one of the reasons it's hard is because we're wired to tune into threats. And there's a lot of messaging right now about fear and things that we are afraid of or pointed to. And there's so much confusion being spewed in the political realm right now that it's like really hard. It's impossible actually for the system to know where to land with all of that. And equanimity arises naturally when we are able to take in the 10,000 joys as well as the 10,000 sorrows. So right here, pointing to balance once again, even though the system is wired based on survival to really attend to the 10,000 sorrows, for example, or all the fear and aversion that we hear, because we need to know how to protect ourselves when there's a threat. We also need to turn to the 10,000 joys, especially in moments like this, so that this heart can find some balance. Equanimity is this force of balance. It's this force of wisdom and care in our hearts that allows us to actually to meet experience on its own terms without having to change it, without actually having to change the world, even though we want to, even though we do engage. We can accept that, oh yeah, it's like this, right? And I don't have to run away from that. I don't have to run away from the hatred in my own heart. I can actually pay attention to that. I can be here because of equanimity, because wisdom allows me to understand that this has its own life cycle. This feeling of anger has its own life. It was birthed from conditions and it will cease due to conditions. It's not actually mine. I can see that right here in the heart. Equanimity is this force of care that allows us to connect with the truth of anger, for example, because of that understanding. So we need to consciously direct our minds. This is really our practice, balancing when we're out of balance, to use what's available to us to balance the mind. So we have to consciously do that. We have to consciously direct our minds to what is good in our hearts and good in the world right now, even our own essential goodness and the expression of that in the world. We have to really be diligent about doing that. It feels really critical to me. I've been noticing, this in my mind for quite a while, like that, how uh, how painful it is when the mind gets stuck in this aversive loop. It feels like an aversive trap that I have to be really intentional about directing the mind somewhere else and letting it be soothed by that different experience. Right? Often it's a pleasant experience. It can be a simple, pleasant experience, like washing the warmth of the water on my hands when I'm washing the dishes. And it can also be our own goodness. It can be aligning or noticing, directing our awareness to goodness in another, to goodness that is expressing itself in the world. And I'm really, I feel a little uplifted today, to tell you the truth, because this has been a consistent practice for me for a little while now. And my days are difficult, just like yours are. I'm inundated with work stuff. Um, I work as a social worker in addition to teaching. Many of you know that. And just to take a moment to shout out to all the social workers. It's like one of the, in my humble opinion, one of the most thankless jobs. And we're working our butts off. You social workers out there are working your butts off, often right in the middle of unsolvable problems day in and day out. It really takes some balance of mind to be there, some equanimity to be there and connect with the truth of really all the difficult social problems that you may know about yourselves. And so, thank you, social workers. Appreciating and loving you very much. So, in my work as a social worker, as I'm connecting with difficult experiences that others are having, really, I've been making it a practice to um, find ways to connect with the 10,000 joys. So simple as noticing the sunny day, opening the window slightly to feel a nice breeze on my face. Sometimes I leave. You're going to hear a lot of dog stories because this is my life these days. Um, but cracking the door just a little bit so that my dog can come in and out. So she likes that. And I feel really delighted by her happy freedom when she can do that. So, consciously directing our minds to what is good in our hearts and good in the world, the simple goodness of this heart that can delight in another's freedom or happiness, or this heart that can delight in the vitality of the spring, for example. And it's not just in the external events, right? It's actually in this heart that can be aware of that, this heart that can receive that this is here too. There are not just bad things happening in the world. It's just the mind that is tuned into that, right? The mind is out of balance. It can't see all of the beauty in the world. And remembering what Ajahn Suchito said, if you were here last week, about bookmarks, that the mind, because of our survival and our nervous systems, need to be able to notice threats, Our minds are really good, our hearts are really good at bookmarking experiences that smell like, taste like, have even the faintest scent of harm or danger, right? So the aversive mind like notices everything that's potentially harmful in the world. And right now, there are a lot of those things to notice. And so we have to train ourselves, we have to train our minds to create new bookmarks, to bookmark other experiences that might help the mind return to some balanced place. And noticing goodness, noticing our own goodness, and noticing the goodness of others, noticing pleasant experiences, noticing life that's all around us in the environment right now, in the natural world. These are some ways to do that. So I'd like to read a little bit from um, the words of the Buddha. So, two different translations of this little passage from the Dhammapada, and I'll read them both. Um, the Buddha said something like, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." And some people think that's not a great translation. The English is translated from the Pali language, which was spoken at the time of the Buddhas, and the words are, have different connotations. So that's one. There's another possibility here, translated as this: mental states are preceded by mind, have mind as their master, and are created by mind. And then one more piece from the Buddha. This is from the Majjhima Nikaya. Whatever a monk keeps pursuing with their thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of their awareness. Whatever a monk keeps pursuing with their thinking and pondering, that becomes the inclination of their awareness. So, monk means a practitioner, be all of us, right? So, when we read this, when we hear these words, it really points to how important it is to notice our thinking mind. And the thinking mind has a lot of responsibility for when we get out of balance, right? We get out of balance, often the mind starts to go crazy and just get stuck in these loops of thinking and worrying and planning and hating and blaming. And this all manifests in the thinking mind. It manifests in the body, it manifests as emotional places, emotional states, and it is often represented in the thoughts, right? We can learn to notice and catch these thoughts, and that gives us some clue as to what's happening in the whole integrated system, the whole integrated embodied system, our systems right here. And so the Buddha is suggesting that we really pay close attention to our thoughts. And as practitioners, we can sometimes get into this habit of demonizing the thinking mind, like wrongfully thinking that um, if we're meditating well, that means that we are somehow suppressing thought. That if we're one way to know that we're meditating well is if we're not thinking, which is not true, right? The mind will think just like the ears will hear and the nose will smell. So it's not a useful aspiration to kill thought. It's actually violent like that. So we don't want to try to do that. But we want to just accept that this mind does this. It has this skill. It's actually, our intelligence can be known this way in our thinking minds. So we can use, we want to know that our thoughts actually have a big part in how we live our lives. Our thoughts actually lead us to do things in our lives and in the world, and they actually contribute to seeds of kindness and care, wisdom, or they contribute to seeds of greed, aversion, delusion. So we can um, take this seriously and learn to pay attention to what the thinking mind is doing. One thing that we can do one thing that we can do is that we can look at what's happening in the world, and we can look at what's happening in the world We often get so caught up in our reactivity that we forget to notice that we're actually noticing, seeing clearly, and that seeing clearly feels good, right? So we can look at what's happening in our minds, we can look at what's happening in the world, and we can simply notice that that intimacy of connection with the truth, it's like this for me for now. There is a pleasant feeling tone there. We can actually see that when we're reading, when we're consuming media, when we're engaging in understanding how it is in the world. We can actually see there, even if the heart is in distress, that with an ability, with a growing capacity to be vulnerable, to learn to trust, to connect, back to what I was saying about being in relationship, using that the example of a therapeutic relationship to point to how we are in relationship with our own systems, that even when there's distress, and we notice this in our therapeutic alliances when we go to therapy, if we've done that, we can see like, oh, a lot of the content is not easy to talk about. It's not easy to say to another, but for some reason, being witnessed by another person is supportive to being able to develop the intimacy and connection of the system, right? And that intimacy actually feels relieving. It feels good. So we can see if we can tune into that throughout our lives, throughout our day, during this time of pandemic, when we have good intentions to actually know what it's like for other people in the world. We might be reading the news, we might be listening to something, but we can see if we can, even before that, like do some preparation and help the mind relax, sit for a few minutes, okay, and intend to do some reading or intend to watch a press conference or something like that. And then just track the system and watch the emotions come and go. And see if you can tune into that feeling of vulnerability and intimacy that's there, and that slightly pleasant appreciation for being able to feel it. It is really a beautiful thing that our hearts can feel. And we can also learn how to see, we can see how the Brahma Viharas might apply here. Right? So the Buddha talked about the Brahma Viharas, these four attitudes of mind, beautiful attitudes, beautiful emotions of different kind of flavors of the caring heart. The Buddha talked about these as constant dwelling places, like the capacity to constantly dwell in these places of love or kindness, right? So, this general friendliness is one of them. And then this friendliness that meets difficulties or suffering, that would be compassion, is another. And then this third one that we don't often spend enough time on, um, appreciative joy or sympathetic joy, called that mudita, this feeling of care that can delight in another's happiness, right? That feeling of mudita was there when it is there often when I notice my dog going in and out of the house. She's free and she seems content, and this heart really delights in that. And then this fourth kind of caring quality of the heart, that is equanimity or balance, that I've described already. So we can see what the Buddha said about these four attitudes or beautiful emotions of the heart, and how they might apply to help us. They might apply here in the interest of helping us stay balanced. So one way is to simply stick with our meditation, our mindfulness practice, and notice that pleasant Vedana in the knowing itself, the awareness itself. And another strategy is to direct the attention to cultivate these beautiful qualities of heart and mind. Now, it's not enough time to go into all of them, um, But I just wanna say that one of the reasons why it's useful to cultivate these qualities is because they can be used as a concentration practice. And as we saw in the meditation tonight, when we're landing on the breath and connecting with the breath, and even using an aspiration or a beautiful intention or some appreciation for our own efforts, to gladden the heart and then reconnect with the breath, you know, that connecting, that that capacity to be intimate actually, when the mind is unified, in and of itself feels good. So the Brahma Viharas metta practice can be used as a way to collect the mind, to unify the mind, and that feels good when the mind can be here. Oh yeah, right. Things. All of our worries can fall away in moments when we, ah, just when the heart can release and just give itself over to noticing the breath, for example. And so it makes sense why the Brahma Viharas can be used as a balancing force because they kind of have that capacity to unify the heart and unify the heart around something really beautiful, right? Tapping into our own essential goodness, actually. So the essential quality of this, essential capacity of this heart, um, our, mm, yeah, our, I can't think of the word, but kind of what's underneath all our bad habits, or all our, not even, we might not even call them bad habits, but neurotic habits, just the stuff of the mind that takes us here and there. That this capacity to be kind is there, and when that falls away, then we can notice that can be illuminated, this heart that cares. So I wanted to talk a little bit, not much longer, we don't have that much more time, but about this capacity to use the practice of mudita or sympathetic joy to rebalance the mind. And just to start by saying, stories are part of this mind's reality. I mentioned this, something like this a few minutes ago. And so we're actually using the thinking mind to our advantage. And so when I notice my dog is feeling, it seems like, of course, I don't know for sure, but she seems content, she seems free, she seems happy and at ease. The mind actually thinks about that, or, in some way, there's some thought that's happening in that moment. And so orienting the mind in the direction of someone else's happiness, looking for that even when, it's not arising naturally, is actually orienting the mind in the direction of a story that is useful and skillful now. So we're not rejecting the thinking mind, we're actually using the thinking mind to help us. Yeah. So the mind is going to create stories, no matter how you shake it. And we get to practice with helping the mind impart some stories that are really going to help us right now. I don't know if you have seen the TED Talk, "Danger of a Single Story" by Shimananda Ngozi Adichie. She's a wonderful, brilliant author, and if you haven't seen it yet, I would recommend it. It's about 15 minutes long. I've watched it a few times. I watched it again today, and it was just impactful as it was the first time for me. But she really has a very beautiful a way of illustrating that, human we, our minds are geared towards, um, thinking that there's more of a singular reality than is actually true. So we kind of peg people in this way. We see people and we think like, oh, all Buddhists are like this, or all children are like this, or all adults are like that, or all Republicans are like this, or all Democrats are like that. And it's just not true. So there's a danger. The danger of a single story is making this mistake of limiting, of the mind being too limited in its understanding. And a way of bringing that point home. If you have heard me teach before, I'm eager for any opportunity to read a Nikki Giovanni poem. And this is one of my favorites, Nikki Rosa. And I think she makes draws it helps us understand the danger of a single story. Nikki Rosa. Childhood remembrances are always a drag if you're Black. You always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilet. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself and how good the water felt when you got your bath from one of those big tubs that folk in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow, when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings as the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale. And even though you remember your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And though you're poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everybody is together and you and your sister have very happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me because they never understand. Black love is Black wealth, and they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was really quite happy. Yeah. Just really such a beautiful poem to me, and really points to the danger of limiting our, of this mind that is limited in its way of understanding experience. And so mudita practice is a way of broadening, balancing, and broadening our noticing. Yeah. And it's really something that we have to, I think, pay close attention to these days. So, and it doesn't one, so I'll tell a very short dog story. Walking my dog today as normal. And, I've talked about this new behavior that she has of pulling while we're on the leash. And while she's on the leash, we're on the leash because I'm holding it. Um, and really wanting to understand what this is about for her. And I don't quite know. And some days it feels like it's getting better, and some days not so much. And today I was noticing just, as I have been practicing with the Brahma Viharas and orienting in the direction of joy and noticing the vitality of the trees, like I mentioned before, and taking some efforts to direct the mind in some useful places, to use some useful places. I was practicing with her, and this was actually happening naturally because it was the habit had been established there. And so when she did a little pulling, then, it's just like a kindness was there with me, like, oh, like curiosity, and I don't understand, but I care. So watching and eventually going over to her and using the sweet voice that I used to talk to her with, and then giving her a couple of head pats and asking her to come on. And she did. It was such a beautiful thing. It surprised me that it was that easy. And also surprised me that I haven't tried it that often. Um, and she came and walking and just noticing how uplifting it was to the mind to have used kindness, and that not only was there potential benefit for my dog, but also the residue was right here. I could really feel it. Like, and I was happy to see her waggy tail and contented pace that she seemed to be walking with after we had this moment. And then, just as I was noticing this good feeling in this heart, we turned the corner, and there's a high rise in our neighborhood, and a high rise for 55 and older. And I call it the retirement villas. And I saw this caution tape around the outside patio. And whereas a day or two earlier, there were people sitting out there social distancing, kind of noticing that that was closed. And my heart felt really sad. So, yeah, really in that moment. And there was a lot of intimacy with that sadness. So it was proof in that moment that connecting or orienting in the direction of joy, of mudita, of appreciating someone else's happiness, does not deter from our capacity to know the truth, right? And this is something that we really need to take to heart, because it can feel like in some ways like betraying the state of the world if we take care of this mind and direct it and to help it return to some balanced place. It can feel like we're somehow betraying the truth, but we're not betraying the truth. That ability to be vulnerable and intimate, even with joy, actually increases the capacity to be intimate with all of life, even the sadness. So that won't go away. We won't lose that if we also uh, increase our capacity to feel into moments, embodied moments of joy. My social work colleagues and I have been playing around with um, how we do business to support our balanced mind. And every week we have a meeting where we come together. And originally, I thought we would be sharing, um, consulting with each other, and maybe seeking advice from one another. And that does happen still to some extent. But what seems to happen more often is just us telling funny stories of ridiculous things that have happened, like happened um, in our workday, and funny things, like yeah, it might not be funny to you if I share them, but they certainly, it does feel good to laugh about how hard it is to be practicing in the world as humans, and in this case, as social workers. And one of the things that we have been pointing to again and again is how useful it is to just offer some kindness, to appreciate other people in our emails that we send out to other people that we're working with, to take a moment to appreciate how hard they're working, to take a moment to appreciate a skill that we have, and to do that with as much specificity as possible. And so, just like tuning into that and how that practice actually manifests with us in our meetings too. L- We are saying things to each other, appreciating each other's capacity, and what I'm noticing is that it has been so delightful to like fall in love with my colleagues. They're beautiful, devoted human beings, and I see their goodness now to an extent that I took for granted because I was a little bit lazy about this practice before this time of pandemic, this time of Ajahn coronavirus, as Tanisra says. So just like how in our daily lives, uh, we can, the point that I was making earlier of how easy it is to rely on outside forces, like being able to go here and there and connect in the ways that we are habitually acclimated to, and how now, and that kind of, without us knowing it, it's not conscious, but puts the responsibility on those outside forces, those activities, our preferences, our, the things that we do for our happiness. But now taking full responsibility for our happiness, to even in like very simple ways find joy, appreciate someone's goodness, appreciate our own goodness, right? We can do that for ourselves too. Yeah. I've also been challenging myself to, um, when I feel inclined to go to the internet in one of my habitual places, like, for example, uh, noticing what our president has tweeted lately, to know. And instead of doing that, I have directed my attention to some good news. I don't know. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. Very short little videos about good things that are happening. They're so sweet. And I've been, again, delighted by the force of human goodness in the world. So I'd encourage you to check that out and to try on this practice of appreciating the goodness of others, appreciating the good fortune of others in the most simple ways in your life, and to see how that helps you um, balance the mind, staying connected with, we're not going to lose that ability to connect to the difficult experiences. We're inundated with that now. And we also need to add in this connection to the 10,000 joys in our lives. Ah. And I talked right up to the end, and you all stayed. 48 of you stayed to the bitter end, appreciating your tenacity. Mm. Let's take a minute and just let the words fall away. And I'd like to dedicate our practice today, appreciating our efforts to be here and the ways that we're really doing our best. It's not easy for us. So we can be grateful and appreciative of just our effort to be here tonight. Really take that in and celebrating the good in our collective Sangha and dedicating the merit of our practice to all beings without exception. And especially welcoming into our hearts all the essential workers. Social workers are now essential workers, and grocery store clerks, and baggers, and cleaners, and the infrastructure of hardworking healthcare workers. It's often, very often, also including our immigrant siblings who are doing so much of the work to support our infrastructure. Mm, appreciating all the beings and all their efforts, all the good that people are contributing to you even now. Mm, may we find ways to balance our hearts. May we find freedom, complete freedom. Thank you, thank you. I'll say goodnight and keep the chat on in case you want to say hello and connect with your friends. I'm going to go now and look for mudita.